The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast a pale glow across the pediatric ward as David Carter carried his 3-year-old son Mason down the long corridor. At 36, David's face showed the strain of countless sleepless nights and the weight of responsibilities that seemed too heavy for one person to bear. Mason wore his favorite Superman pajamas, the bright blue fabric a cheerful contrast to the sterile hospital environment. Despite his illness, the little boy's eyes still held that spark of curiosity that made David's heart both swell with love and ache with worry. "Daddy, are the doctors going to make me feel better?" Mason asked, his small voice echoing softly in the hallway. David adjusted his son's weight in his arms, being careful not to disturb the foreline that had been placed earlier. "Yes, buddy. The doctors here are very smart. They are going to take good care of you." For the past 6 months, David had been fighting a battle he never expected to face alone. Mason had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder that required specialized treatment and frequent hospital stays. As a construction worker, David's insurance covered the basics, but the mounting medical bills were crushing him financially. He had been forced to take unpaid leave from work to care for Mason, and their small savings account had been depleted weeks ago. Tonight, he had brought Mason to the emergency room because his fever had spiked dangerously high, and David knew he could not wait until morning. As they walked deeper into the hospital, David tried to push away the fear that gnawed at him constantly. What if he could not afford the treatment Mason needed? What if he failed as a father when his son needed him most? They passed the hospital's administrative wing, where through glass doors David could see well-dressed people in what appeared to be some kind of evening meeting. Board members, he assumed, making decisions about budgets and policies while families like his struggled to navigate the complex world of medical care. Suddenly, Mason straightened up in David's arms and pointed toward the glass doors. "Daddy, look." David followed his son's gaze, wondering what had caught the boy's attention. "That's Mommy," Mason said with absolute certainty, his small finger pointing at a woman in an elegant white blouse and navy skirt who was standing at the head of a conference table. David's heart stopped. The woman Mason was pointing to was clearly someone important, surrounded by other executives and speaking with the confident authority of someone accustomed to leadership. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with blonde hair pulled back professionally and an air of success that spoke of wealth and power. "Mason, sweetie, that is not Mommy," David said gently, though his voice caught slightly. Mason's mother had left them when Mason was barely a year old, unable to handle the demands of motherhood and choosing to pursue her career instead. David had not heard from her since. But Mason shook his head firmly, the way children do when they know something adults have forgotten. "That is Mommy. I remember her smell. I remember her voice." At that moment, the woman in the conference room looked up and her eyes met David's through the glass. For a split second, her composed expression faltered, and David saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, shock, and something that might have been pain. The woman excused herself from the meeting and walked toward the door. As she approached, David could see that Mason had been right. Despite the expensive clothes and polished appearance, this was indeed Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had given birth to Mason and then disappeared from their lives. "David," Sarah said quietly as she stepped into the hallway, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah," David replied, his own voice strained with emotions he thought he had buried long ago. Mason reached out his small arms towards Sarah, his face lighting up with joy. "Mommy, I knew it was you." Sarah's carefully composed facade cracked completely. Tears began to form in her eyes as she looked at the little boy she had not seen in over 2 years. "Mason," she whispered, her voice breaking. David stood frozen, holding Mason between them, unsure of what to do or say. The woman before him looked nothing like the struggling young mother who had left them. She was clearly successful now, wealthy even, judging by her designer clothes and the fact that she was leading what appeared to be a hospital board meeting. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she seemed to realize the answer. Her eyes took in Mason's hospital bracelet and the foreline, and her face went pale. "Mason is sick," David said simply. "He has been in and out of hospitals for months. Tonight his fever got too high, so I brought him to the emergency room." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "What is wrong with him?" "A blood disorder," David explained, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the conversation. The doctors say it is treatable, but it requires ongoing care and medication that costs more than I can afford. Sarah looked at Mason, who was still reaching for her with complete trust and love, as if she had never been gone. "Can I hold him?" she asked hesitantly. David hesitated for only a moment before carefully transferring Mason to Sarah's arms. The little boy immediately snuggled against her, as if some deep part of him remembered the safety of his mother's embrace. "I missed you, Mommy," Mason said simply, his small hand patting Sarah's cheek. Sarah closed her eyes, holding Mason close as tears streamed down her face. "I missed you too, baby. More than you will ever know." David watched this reunion with conflicted emotions. Part of him was angry at Sarah for leaving them when they needed her most. But another part of him, the part that saw how much Mason needed his mother, felt something like relief. "Sarah," David said quietly, "what happened to you? Where have you been?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked at David over Mason's head. "After I left, I threw myself into work. I started a medical consulting company, and it grew faster than I ever imagined. I became successful, wealthy even. But I convinced myself that you and Mason were better off without me." She paused, stroking Mason's hair gently. "I told myself that I was too selfish, too career-focused to be a good mother. I thought if I stayed away, you could find someone better for Mason." "But you never tried to contact us," David said, trying to keep the hurt out of his voice. "I was afraid," Sarah admitted. "Afraid that you would reject me. Afraid that Mason would not remember me. Afraid that I would hurt both of you again." Mason looked up at Sarah with serious eyes. "Are you going to stay this time, Mommy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked from Mason to David, then back to her son. "If your daddy will let me," she said quietly, "I would like to try. I would like to help take care of you and make sure you get all the medicine you need to feel better." David studied Sarah's face, looking for any sign that this was just another temporary decision she would abandon when it became difficult. But what he saw was genuine remorse and a determination that had not been there 3 years ago. "Mason needs his mother," David said finally. "And frankly, I need help. I cannot do this alone anymore." Over the following weeks, Sarah slowly re-entered their lives. She used her wealth and connections to ensure Mason received the best possible care from the top specialists in the country. She also used her influence as a major hospital benefactor to help other families facing similar struggles. But more importantly, she began the slow process of rebuilding her relationship with Mason and earning David's trust. She attended every doctor's appointment, learned to give Mason his medications, and spent hours reading to him and playing his favorite games. 3 months later, Mason's condition had stabilized significantly thanks to the excellent care he was receiving. The three of them sat in Mason's hospital room, reading stories together as Mason received his weekly treatment. "Daddy," Mason said, looking up from his book, "are we a family again?" David and Sarah exchanged glances. They had been having careful conversations about the future, taking things slowly and focusing primarily on Mason's needs. "We are working on it, buddy," David said gently. "What do you think about that?" Mason smiled the bright, innocent smile that had carried them all through the darkest days. "I think families help each other when someone is sick. And families stay together." Sarah reached over and took David's hand. "Mason is very wise for a 3-year-old." David squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, he is. He knew who you were even when I did not believe him." "Children see with their hearts," Sarah said softly. "Maybe we should all try to do that more often." 6 months later, Mason was declared to be in full remission. Sarah had established a foundation to help other families facing medical crises, and she had learned to balance her successful career with her role as a mother. David had returned to work, but now with the security of knowing that Mason would always have the care he needed. More importantly, he had learned that sometimes people leave not because they do not love you, but because they do not yet know how to love themselves. As they walked out of the hospital together after Mason's final treatment, the little boy looked up at both his parents and said, "I told you that was Mommy. I never forgot her." Sarah knelt down and hugged Mason tightly. "And I never forgot you, sweetheart. Not for a single day." Sometimes, David reflected, the most important reunions happen in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, it takes a child's unwavering faith to remind adults that love, real love, never truly disappears. It just waits patiently for the right moment to find its way home.